What if I told you there's an abandoned World War II era army training camp the size of a small city, which once trained the now renowned forces of General George Patton and is now lost deep in the swampy forests of Louisiana? Or that the ruins of an overgrown, crumbling fort lie abandoned on a lost island that once also served as the hideout for one of the most infamous pirates in American history? I didn't believe it either when I heard about it at first, but then I decided to go check out these places myself and I was blown away. Today, we'll be exploring the top 10 abandoned military bases in Louisiana. Number 10, Battery Bienvenue. Hidden away deep in a tangled maze of swampy islands and marshy canals off the untamable coast of Louisiana lie the crumbling, overgrown ruins of a coastal gun battery on a forgotten island that seems to have been frozen in time. The battery was constructed at a strategic junction blocking one of the attack routes to New Orleans that had been recently exploited by the British throughout the War of 1812 during their attempted invasion of the city. In time, the battery's arsenal was eventually expanded to 24 32-pound cannons and two 13-inch mortars with a garrison of one artillery company, and eventually 4 buildings occupied the parade ground, including a barracks, guardhouse, officers' quarters, and an artillery magazine. The battery was approximately 600 feet wide and surrounded by a defensive moat. During the Civil War, the battery was briefly occupied by a small Confederate garrison, which later withdrew along with the nearby garrisons from Forts Pike and Macomb as the nearby city of New Orleans fell to the invading Union armies. Today, Battery Bienvenue's crumbling walls still stand in Bayou Bienvenue, along with the ruins of some of its supporting structures. Incredibly, some of the battery's original guns still actually remain mounted on their emplacements, surrounded by the thick snake-infested vegetation growing on and around the fortification. Number 9, Fort Macomb. Out here on the untamed, sometimes choppy coasts of southeastern Louisiana lie the ruins of a crumbling, overgrown, abandoned fort that was built several decades before the onset of the American Civil War. This is Fort Macomb, a massive, now abandoned 19th century fort in Louisiana, constructed over 2 centuries ago on one of the only choke points to reach and potentially capture the city of New Orleans via an all-sea route. The fort was designed in the shape of a pie wedge, with a curved front facing the channel to provide the maximum angle of coverage possible for the fort's guns, which would have poked out of the fort through narrow slits on the fort's outside walls. The fort was surrounded by 2 wet ditches or moats, with extensive outworks between the ditches for an extra layer of protection. Meanwhile, inside the walls you can still see the remains of the barracks, armory, and other areas of the once imposing fortification, now crumbling and overgrown with vegetation. A Louisiana garrison took control of the fort on January 28th of 1861, early on in the American Civil War. However, the Union Army would soon go on to capture the fort and occupy New Orleans about a year later. Then in 1867, the barracks caught fire, after which the fort was largely abandoned by the U.S. Army, as the fort was deemed too obsolete to be worth any further repairs or upgrades. And today, Fort Macomb is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Number 8, Monkey Island Coast Guard Station. Somewhere off the coast of Louisiana lies a forgotten island that holds the overgrown ruins of a rusting port, over a mile of abandoned state highway, and the lost, decaying ruins of an old Coast Guard station. Welcome to Monkey Island. This island was cut off from civilization in 2005, when Hurricane Rita caused severe flooding, devastation, and destruction over many parts of Texas and Louisiana. One of the casualties of this hurricane's wrath was the ferry that used to link this island to mainland Louisiana, allowing locals to avoid taking a long inland detour. However, the demise of these ferries brought an end to pretty much all outside traffic on the island. In addition to the abandoned, overgrown highway, the island holds a handful of still occupied beach homes and the crumbling remains of the old Monkey Island Coast Guard Station, which was active during World War II and throughout the mid-20th century, serving as a base for search and rescue operations and housing a radio beacon. The installation was closed down in the early 1980s, and today, its collapsing ruins are in a state of total disrepair, and any explorer would be hard-pressed to even tell what these ruins once used to be. There has been some talk about rebuilding the island's infrastructure and building a bridge to connect it to the mainland, but so far, nothing has materialized. For now, Monkey Island will remain an isolated example of a a post-apocalyptic world, a place where humans are, for the most part, nothing but a distant memory, and nature reigns supreme. Number 7. Fort Pike. Not far from our previously mentioned Fort Macomb sit the crumbling, unstable remains of another nearby fort that was originally designed to assist in the defense of New Orleans in the event of any potential future attacks after the War of 1812. Built in 1819, Fort Pike was used as a detention facility for Seminole Native Americans during the Seminole Wars in Florida throughout the 1820s, before they were eventually transported to the Seminole Reservation in Oklahoma. The Louisiana Continental Guard took control of the fort in 1861, just weeks before Louisiana joined the Confederacy, and the American Civil War began. When Union forces captured New Orleans in 1862, the Confederate forces evacuated Fort Pike, and the Union re-established control of the installation, using it as a base for raids. The fort also became a training site for United States colored troops, established in 1864 before finally being abandoned altogether by the United States Army in 1890. The fort is now on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's been used in several films and TV shows. Number 6. Fort Proctor. Our next location on this list brings us to Louisiana's murky coastal waters to explore the crumbling ruins of an abandoned island fort that's more than 160 years old. Fort Proctor, also known as Beauregard's Castle, was built in 1856, shortly before the onset of the American Civil War. It was intended to be part of the massive network of fortifications protecting water routes towards New Orleans. However, shortly after it was completed, a hurricane damaged the structure, and before it could be repaired and put in service, the Civil War erupted, diverting attention from the site. By the time anyone had the time and energy to put the fort into use, improvements in artillery had already made the design of the fort obsolete, and eventually it was simply left to rot, although in 1978 it was finally listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Only accessible by boat now, Fort Proctor is completely surrounded by a mixture of waist-deep mud and water, infested with critters, and partially flooded on the inside. Number 5. Camp Livingston. For our next location, we're venturing deep into Louisiana's wild, untamed swamps and forests to explore an overgrown World War II Army training camp known as Camp Livingston. Located 12 miles north of Alexandria, Louisiana, Camp Livingston was active from 1940 to 1945. It was established as an infantry training facility in 1940, and as it continued to expand, it eventually grew to the size of a small city, including a hospital, laundry, motor repair shops, sewage disposal plant, utilities, water system, gas and electricity, 4 fire stations, 13 religious chapels, 4 War Department theaters, paved roads, traffic lights, and a large all-purpose sports arena with roller skating, dancing, boxing, basketball courts, and other team sports. Throughout its approximately 5 years in operation, Camp Livingston trained hundreds of thousands of soldiers for combat, as well as serving as a POW facility housing Japanese, German, and Italian prisoners of war. As the conflict came to a close, Camp Livingston was deactivated in late 1945 and is now part of the Kisatchie National Forest, meaning you can still explore some of the original concrete streets, building foundations, former parking lots, parade areas, and at least 2 of the swimming pools, while the original water treatment plant that was built to serve the camp is still in operation today. Number 4. Fort St. Philip. Deep in the wild swamps of Louisiana lie the crumbling remains of an abandoned fort that was originally built by Spanish forces in 1795, during the time when Louisiana was controlled by Spain. It would eventually end up passing through the hands of 3 different nations and marking the site of several crucial battles, severe storms, and even a cult. When originally completed, the fort was equipped with 35 cannons, howitzers, and mortars. When the Americans acquired the fort in 1804 as part of the Louisiana Purchase, they started building several improvements, including a signal station 3 miles below the installation, an earthen redoubt to defend the fort's rear side, and overhead cover above the fort's gun batteries to prevent shell fragments from hitting the gun crews. These improvements came just in time for the War of 1812, when the garrison of Fort St. Philip was successfully able to defend the river approach to New Orleans from the British Navy. The fort would also see action during the Civil War in 1862, when a Confederate garrison unsuccessfully attempted to stop the Union Navy from bypassing the fort and capturing New Orleans. Many decades later, the fort was used as a tanning factory in the 1930s before eventually serving as the site of a non-sectarian spiritual community called Villa Ashby from 1978 through 1989. The community members numbered as many as 16 at any one time and were known as the Christos family. family. The leader of the community, Louis Hubert Casebolt, more commonly known as Arcana Christos, meaning oldest anointed one, eventually ended up committing at the site. Shortly after his death, the community left the fort and the surrounding area, once again leaving the fort to rot. Number 3. F. Edward Hebert Defense Complex. The Naval Support Activity installation in New Orleans is a colossal complex of 3 six-story buildings that stretch upward over the eastern bank of the Mississippi River. Constructed during World War I, the U.S. Army originally built the 1.5 million square foot logistics center for the U.S. Army Quartermaster Depot. By the time it was completed in 1919, the complex included extensive recreational facilities, 1,800 parking spaces, 1 million square feet of office space, and a parade ground. The massive installation eventually ended up expanding over both sides of the Mississippi River, making it the largest in New Orleans, while employing thousands of personnel for its operations. Between 1944 and 1966, the site progressed from a U.S. naval station to the U.S. Naval Headquarters. The Army transferred ownership to the Navy, and along with the neighboring Algiers base on the West Bank, the site became the Naval Support Activity, also known as NSA New Orleans, in 1966. The administrative base tenants included the National Headquarters for the Navy Reserve and Marine Corps Reserve. In the early 1970s, the naval complex was renamed the F. Edward Hebert Defense Complex, after the New Orleans congressman who served a stint as chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. In May 2005, the Defense Department decided to close the Naval Support Activity during a base realignment and closure round, or BRAC for short. This resulted in the Navy moving its headquarters to Virginia and its personnel functions to Tennessee, while the Marine Corps Reserve headquarters was moved to the neighboring Algiers complex. Today, the shuttered base appears to be empty and forgotten, with knee-high weeds and graffiti both inside and outside the facility. Number 2. Fort Livingston. Fort Livingston started its life in the mid-1800s as a coastal defense fort located on Grande Terre Island, off the coast of Louisiana. But the significance of this island dates back at least several decades earlier, before the construction of this massive, imposing fortress even began. At that point, during the early 1800s, the island was being used by the infamous pirate captain Jean Lafitte as a hideout and base of operations for smuggling and piracy. At one point, Lafitte is said to have commanded as many as 1,000 men and several different ships in his flourishing smuggling colony. However, the situation changed drastically when the British decided to attempt an invasion of New Orleans as part of their war effort. And when Captain Lafitte heard of it, he sent the Americans advance warning of the impending attack. Heavily outnumbered and unprepared, the Americans met with Lafitte, who offered to serve if the United States would pardon those of his men who agreed to defend the city. The American general agreed, and with Lafitte's encouragement, many of his men joined the New Orleans militia or as sailors to man the ships. Others formed 3 different artillery companies. Ultimately, the campaign ended up in a resounding success for the United States, resulting in a full pardon for both Captain Lafitte and his men. With regards to this fort here, construction was started in 1834 to guard the entrance to New Orleans against future naval attacks from the south. However, work on the fort was halted with the start of the Civil War in 1861, and it was never resumed, meaning that ultimately this fort was actually never fully completed. The fort was briefly occupied by Confederate forces during the American Civil War, with their garrison here consisting of about 300 men, equipped with 15 guns of different shapes and sizes. Nevertheless, Confederate forces would end up abandoning the fort after the fall of New Orleans, and decades later, the fort was permanently shut down for the last time after a hurricane destroyed most of the structure in 1872. Number 1. Camp Claiborne. For our number 1 location on this list of the top 10 abandoned military bases in Louisiana, we're going way out here, deep in the foreboding, heavily wooded forests of Louisiana, to explore an abandoned World War II training facility. Camp Claiborne, as it became known, was established in 1930, and it was massive, spanning over 57 square miles. From the year 1939 to 1946, over 500,000 men went through training at Camp Claiborne, including basic training, artillery practice, engineering unit training, and railroad battalion training. To simulate wartime repairs of railroads and experiment with the derailing of trains, the Claiborne Polk Military Railroad was also built in the area. It was only about 50 miles long, but those were 50 miles of hell on earth. Thus, this railroad soon became known as the Crime and Punishment Railroad. Due to the harsh terrain and the railroad's vicious curves, derailments were frequent, and sometimes the rails would even sink into the swamp, and cars would be lost in the quicksand. As if that wasn't bad enough, there were also plenty of alligators and snakes prowling nearby throughout the entire process, adding one more challenge into the mix. forces. As operations continued to expand here, Camp Claiborne soon grew to the size of a small city, complete with roads, natural gas, electricity and running water, 5 service clubs, several shops, 17 chapels, 6 movie theaters, 3 guest houses, a bank, several recreation buildings, and even an amphitheater. Eventually, several notable divisions would end up receiving their training here throughout World War II. For example, the men of the 101st Airborne Division, which would later become known as the Screaming Eagles in Europe, got their start here in the piney forests of central Louisiana, while one of General George S. Patton's highly trained tank battalions, the 761st, was trained here as well before rising to prominence on the battlefields of Europe. Towards the end of the war, the camp was eventually deactivated in 1945, and it's been abandoned ever since. Many buildings have crumbled, but others are still there, being taken over by nature and reminding us of the pivotal role this location played in training American forces for combat in Europe and beyond. Hey guys, Mauricio from Beyond Civilization here. Thanks so much for exploring these amazing abandoned locations with me. I couldn't do this without you all. If you feel like I missed anything, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, or even check out some of my other top 10 abandoned location compilations. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on my next adventure.